it's Stephanie with the Rancher's Homestead. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than normal. Usually I kind of do more of a day in the life and take you around through our day a little bit and different things. Today's going to be a how-to video. So for the last, I would say 4 months or so, I have been working on a new bread, a new gluten-free bread. And this is different than my other two breads I have. I have a gluten-free sourdough bread out that I will link in the description, and I also have just a very simple gluten-free all-purpose sandwich style bread. This bread is a little bit different because I am making an all-purpose gluten-free whole grain bread. That means I am taking the grains, I am freshly milling them myself, and then I am making a bread dough out of them. Now, what I really wanted was a bread dough that was whole grain like this, but that I could use in multiple different recipes, so not just for bread. And so today I am going to show you the base recipe, the base bread recipe. So we're going to make a bread out of this, but then this will go on for weeks where I can show you all kinds of different delicious foods that you can make with this specific bread dough, and you can turn it into other things. There will be a few modifications, so for the instance, if you're making donuts, I'll probably add a little bit more sugar or maple syrup or something in the dough. But for the most part, the bread recipe will stay the same, and then you can use it for cinnamon rolls, pizza dough. I've used it as croissants, dinner rolls, all different things. So we're going to start here, and then we're going to grow from there. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the different type of grains that I'm using and also the binding agent that I'm using and why I'm using them. Okay, so the first grain that we are using in this bread is brown rice. So you're going to take fresh brown rice, you can get it anywhere, and you're going to go ahead and freshly mill it with a food mill. Now, this recipe can be done using already milled flour. So if you don't have a food mill and you don't want to get the benefits of freshly milled flour, then you can go ahead and just buy brown rice flour and sorghum flour. But I highly, highly recommend milling your own flour. Now, I'm not going to get into all the benefits of freshly milled flour, specifically wheat as well, because that's not what this video is about. I do highly recommend you looking up the Bread Beckers, and I'll drop a link in the description. They're on YouTube. They have a website. Their whole ministry and mission is to educate people and share with them what freshly milled flour can do for you, whole grains can do for your health. And after watching that video that someone shared with me, I was really encouraged, and it just made so much sense on our food system and just what whole grains can do for our bodies. The problem is that she was specifically talking about wheat, which I have celiac and can't have. And so I really didn't dive into freshly milled gluten-free grains until recently, and it's been really, really great. And there are just as many benefits to doing it with gluten-free grains as there is with wheat. However, I will say this: if you are somebody who is just gluten intolerant, you do not have celiac, and you just have a really hard time handling gluten, then I would definitely look into the Bread Beckers and definitely look into milling your own flours at home, because that may be the solution that you have been looking for. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not telling you that that is the solution to your health problems, but I will say that it was eye-opening for me, and I highly recommend others looking at it as well. Okay, so the first one we're doing is brown rice, and that is because I use brown rice flour in this recipe. And brown rice is a really great source of fiber, and it has antioxidants in it. It's a good high amount of magnesium, and when you keep it freshly milled, you keep the germ and the bran intact, which you will learn in those videos if you go and watch them. And that's where all of the nutrients is. And so the longer it sits after it becomes flour, the less nutrients are in it. And so the best thing to do is to mill your grains right before you're ready to bake with them. And so that's what we're going to go ahead and do today. So the first one is brown rice flour, which is a really easy one because you can get it anywhere. Now, I buy all of my grains on Azure Standard, and I will link in the description where that is. And if you are unsure about what Azure Standard is, it's a grocery co-op that I do online, and I pick it up, my order up from the truck every single month there. So you find a drop location close to you, and that's where you pick up your order. So that is the first grain we use. Okay, the second grain that I am using is a sorghum grain. And so this grain is really good. It is a very good fiber as well. Now, one thing you will notice when you freshly mill any kind of grain, whether it be wheat or a gluten-free grain, is the fiber that is in it, because the bran and the germ are intact. And so you will find that you will be using the bathroom regularly, which is a good thing. Not regularly to the point of runny or anything like that, but regularly meaning that after you eat, you should be disposing of the toxins, the waste that your body does not need in the bathroom. And if you're not doing that after every meal, your body isn't removing all of it, and it will come out in other forms of your body, meaning through your skin, with eczema, with acne, just all different kinds of things. So it's very important to have a good source of fiber, and milling your own grains at home gives you just that. So other things that sorghum grains are good for is they reduce inflammation, which makes them very gut healthy and gut friendly. Same with the brown rice are very gut healthy as well. Brown rice, I forgot to mention, also is very good for your heart. So it helps with your heart health. The other thing that sorghum grains are good for is that they're high in potassium and copper and iron and protein. And so all of those things are really good nutrients for our body. So I really love using sorghum flour. Now, I use more brown rice than I do sorghum. And the reason for that is more just taste. So sorghum will have a much higher, stronger, I should say, taste. And so using the brown rice to counterbalance that is a lot milder, and we like it a lot more. Now, the third flour that you are going to use in your bread is going to be a tapioca starch. All gluten-free baking needs some form of a starch to counterbalance your grains. Otherwise, they just don't turn out right in the structure and texture, color, that kind of thing. So you do need to have some form of a starch with your grains and in any kind of a bread recipe, or just baking in general, gluten-free. And so I choose to use a tapioca starch. Tapioca flour, they're the exact same thing. Sometimes companies call it flour, sometimes they call it starch. It's the same thing, so either one is fine. Typically, you may not be able to find that at a local grocery store, but I do get my grains, my tapioca starch, all of that from Azure Standard, which I will drop in the description. Last thing we're going to talk about before we get this bread made is the binding agent. So with gluten-free, you do not have a binding agent in, obviously the gluten is your binding agent in a regular bread. In gluten-free, you don't have that, so you need to add something in. There are 3 kinds of binding agents that you can use. There is a gur gum, there is xanthan gum, or psyllium husk. I am choosing to use psyllium husk in this recipe, and I highly recommend you use that as well. If you do not want to use psyllium husk and you have xanthan gum, you can use that. But psyllium husk has way more benefits on top of just being a binding agent for you. It is so nutritious for you. It is also a good source of fiber, so you're working on all of these things with the brown rice and the sorghum, and you have these good sources of fiber that you're freshly milling. Why not add to that and use psyllium husk as your binding agent? So I really like the way that it holds the bread together. It's more of like a gel factor, and that works really, really well. It has heart health and pancreas health. It helps to lower blood sugar and cholesterol. And the big one that I really like is that it helps with your gut health. So irritable bowel syndrome or things like that, things that you're having a hard time processing, psyllium husk is really, really beneficial for that. And so it just makes sense in a really healthy whole grain bread that you're making to use psyllium husk as your binding agent as opposed to one of the other ones. Like I said, you can choose to use the other ones, but I highly recommend psyllium husk. I will drop a link to where I buy it. I do buy it from Amazon, and I believe it is the Anthony's brand that I really like. I have it in my cart and I can't think of the brand right off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it's the Anthony's brand. I already get it in a powder form. You can get whole psyllium husks and then grind them yourself. That is okay, but I like to do it with already in the powder form. It just makes it easier, and I keep a big jar of it in my cupboard over there. So we're going to mill our grains. So I'm going to take you back here where my mill is, tell you the mill that I have and why I like it, and then we're going to get these things milled up so we can start making some bread. Okay, so I'm over here with my grain mill. I got a Nutri-Mill grain mill, And this mill I really like. I bought it refurbished on their website, so it was about, I think, $100 cheaper than if I were to buy brand new. It does specifically say on there, not guaranteed to be gluten-free, mainly because it's refurbished. So it's been used before, wheat has been in it before, but when I got it, it was almost like brand new. We are not completely super sensitive to that, so even if there was maybe a very minuscule particle left in the stone, because I'll show you what that looks like. I have some of my grains in here. Even if there is anything left in this stone, it wouldn't typically make us sick, but it was very clean. I mean, it looked brand new, so we have had no problems with it. But this I use for my gluten-free grain. So I have used my husband's in it, and then I've just had him go out and blow it out really well with our air compressor. And then I really scrub it nice and clean without water, because you don't want to get anything wet, but with rags and really wipe it. Then he blows it out, wipe it, blows it out. Lately, I haven't even used any of his. I just do my own gluten-free with it. So I really like it. What I love the most about it, as you can see, I use it so regularly, I don't clean it as often as I should, but it's very easily cleanable. It comes with this little brush that sticks up here to be able to get all of your flour out of there. It comes with this side so you can really sweep out any of the particles. I use a not a wet rag, a dry rag, and wipe it out as well and poke it down the hole so that it comes out here. Everything comes apart, the stone, and even the bowl on top where your grains sit. So I really like it. It's very easy. So the bowl comes out like this, and then it easily just clicks right back in. So when I am making these breads, I get 2 clean bowls out, and the reason is because when I mill each of these grains, I want them to be separate. So if I have any left over, then I can just add them to the buckets of already milled flour or the flour that I buy. I do buy already milled flour, so I buy brown rice flour and sorghum flour on as your standard for when I feed my starter. But when I'm making my bread, I usually just mill my own grains as I go. If I have a little bit left over in the bowl, I'll go ahead and toss it into those buckets so that it just gets used back up. So I want to keep them separate. And so what you're going to do is you're going to put your grain, and for brown rice, I do about 2.5 cups. Mostly because you're going to use the brown rice when you are shaping your dough as well and dusting your countertop. So I want to make sure that I have enough for that. So I will put 2 cups in to start with, because that's what it holds nicely. And then as I go down, I'll usually do just a little bit more. And I'm going to do it into the bigger size bowl, because you're going to use more brown rice flour than you are sorghum flour. Go ahead and leave your cap off. This top knob right here is what makes those stones get closer together or farther apart. I want a more fine flour. So I want it to be whole grain, but I don't want the bread to be super grainy. So when I turn it on, I'm going to tighten this or loosen it to make it the consistency that I want. Okay, so here is my brown rice flour, and this I can tell is just about enough to make my bread, so I'm going to go ahead and set that aside. I don't clean it out in between, and I just go ahead and do my sorghum flour. Now, sorghum, you're only going to do 100 grams of sorghum flour in the bread recipe, so I just do 1 cup. That's usually plenty for the sorghum flour. If you want to do just a little bit more to make sure you have enough, because we do weigh it, so it is always different. You know, we're not doing it by volume, we're doing it by weight. And so I will do just about a cup, but if you want to do a little bit more to be sure, you can. And then like I do, I just throw it right on into my already milled flour bucket. So we're going to get this in now. Okay, now my sorghum flour is done, so now we're going to hop back over and we're going to make some bread. Okay, so to make this bread, you're going to want to use a stand mixer. You can use a hand mixer if you don't have a stand one, but this just works a lot better because you're going to start with 2 cups of warm water. You will need a little bit more warm water. I mean, I can almost guarantee you will, but it is much easier as making the mistake of adding too much water and then adding everything and the consistency wasn't right, and then it's hard to add the right ratio of flours back into your super wet dough instead of having super dry dough and just adding in splashes of water. So you're going to want to start with 2 cups, but you likely will add more than that. So I'm going to do 2 cups of water. I'm going to do 3 teaspoons of active dry yeast. And then I have 4 tablespoons of honey here, and I've melted it down just a little bit so that it came out of my bowl easier. And I'm going to add that in. Now I'm going to go ahead and give it a quick stir, and then let it sit and proof. While this is proofing, I'm going to go ahead and weigh out all of my dry ingredients. Okay, this is where we are going to go ahead and weigh out our flour. So we're going to weigh it in grams. I just have a digital kitchen scale that I got on Amazon, and I can link this one, but any digital kitchen scale will work. And you're going to do 280 grams of the brown rice flour. If you did not freshly mill your flour, you can just use regular brown rice flour that you have bought that's already milled. And see, I have just a little bit left over. This will be perfect for dusting the countertop. Now I'm going to clear it so it goes back to 0. And I'm going to do 100 grams of the sorghum flour. Oops, I did a little bit too much there, so I'll take a little off. A little bit more. And I have my tapioca starch here on the ground, and I'm going to do 120 grams of tapioca starch. Now you're going to add in some baking powder. I just do 1 tablespoon of baking powder. I'm sorry, 1 teaspoon of baking powder. And 2 teaspoons of salt. Now my yeast is nice and proofed, so I am going to add in my psyllium husk. And I'm going to do 3 tablespoons of the psyllium husk. 3. And I just add it right on in with my yeast. What you want this to do, I'm going to take a whisk here. I have butter melting here on the stove because that's going to be the next step. I just go ahead and whisk it up in here. And give it a second to get thick, and it kind of gets like a gel consistency. Now, I have 1 whole stick of butter here that I have been melting on the stove. You can melt it in the microwave, however you do it. You're going to want 1 whole stick of butter. If you need to be dairy-free, then in place of the butter, you can use an avocado oil or an olive oil or something like that. And for replacement of the whole stick of butter, I would do 4 tablespoons of an avocado oil or a olive oil. Okay, so this is nice and thick now. We're going to go ahead and add in our dry ingredients. We're going to add in 2 eggs. We're going to add in 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. This helps with the gumminess and the texture of your bread, so don't skip that. You can't taste it, I promise. And then you're going to add in 1 whole stick of butter. That's melted. Okay, now we are going to turn this on, and this is where you just have to learn to read your dough. So, I know for a fact I'm going to need a little bit of water because I always need a little bit of water. Measurement is like 2 cups to 2 1/4 or 2 1/2, and I can never get it just right. Sometimes I tried 2 1/2, sometimes I tried 2 1/4, and it just never seemed right. And so that's why going down to 2 cups, I know it's going to be a little too thick, and just a splash or two of water more gives it just the right consistency. What you're looking for is for your dough to be a little bit sticky, but it's definitely going to come together. So I'm going to turn this on. Now I can see that there is some flour on the bottom, so I'm just going to give it a touch of water to see if I can't pick that flour up off of the bottom of my my mixer. And I might need just a touch more. Okay, so it's picked up all of that off of the mixer, off the bottom, and now it is just gonna work its magic. And that's what the beauty of the stand mixer. So I'm gonna let it keep going, and I know I've reached the right consistency. It is pooling and forming together, but it is still sticky. The stickiness is what's different than a regular gluten dough, because you know you're gonna get a better texture this way. So I'm gonna let this go for a minute or two. Okay, now I'm going to take my brown rice flour here and dust my surface so I can get my dough out onto it. Now you can see that it's very sticky, and that's good. You want it to come together, but you also want it to be sticky, so it's kind of that fine line. Gluten-free bread making is different than regular bread making. Okay, I'm gonna scrape my bowl and get the whole dough out on my counter. I'm going to take a little bit more of this flour and sprinkle it on top. And I'm just going to let it rest for just a second. Okay, so now that I have it rested, I'm going to kind of flip it over a couple times on my counter here. And I'm just going to shape it into a loaf. So I kind of flatten it a little bit, and then roll it into a ball and a long little rectangle loaf. I hit it a couple times on my counter to get out any air bubbles. And I have a well-buttered bread pan here. I'm just going to stick my loaf right on in. Now, gluten-free doesn't take very long to rise. It takes maybe about 20 minutes. There's a fine line between that as well. You just want it to barely reach the top of your bread pan, and then you're ready to bake. So I'm going to stick this in a warm spot to rise, and then once it has rose up to just about the top of my bread pan, we'll go ahead and bake it. Okay, so as you can see, my bread has rose up to the top. The middle gets a little bit more than the sides, and this is perfect. I've preheated my oven to 425 degrees. I'm going to stick this in, and I'm going to bake it for 35 minutes. At 35 minutes, it should be very golden brown on the top. It still needs about 25 more minutes, so I'll just put a piece of foil over the top of it so that it doesn't burn, and then let it go for another 25 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this in the oven and get it baked. Okay, so I have pulled the bread out of the oven. You want to check the internal temperature and make sure that it's 205 degrees or higher. So that's really, really important to ensure that it doesn't get gummy on the inside, which is a problem with gluten-free bread. So 205 degrees or higher is what you want the internal temperature of your bread, which typically is about an hour at 425. But I usually set my timer for 35 minutes for the first round, cover it with foil and do another 20, check it, and then see where I'm at for there. Now you want to take your bread and you want to dump it out and put it on a rack to cool completely before you slice it. That is tip number 2 for any kind of gluten-free bread, and really bread in general, but definitely gluten-free bread. You want your bread to be completely cooled before you slice it at all. So otherwise you will get really gummy bread there too. So I hope that this was helpful. I hope that you guys learned how to make a new kind of bread. I highly recommend doing whole grains, freshly milling your grains, even if you have to be gluten-free. This bread has been so delicious, and actually my kids are preferring it over any other. My hope is that soon I will have a gluten-free whole grain sourdough bread. I haven't got the texture down just right in the whole grain, but I'm working on it, and I hope that'll be the next one to share. As we go about in the next few months, be watching for different recipes to come out using this base recipe as our base for all of these products. And then I'll be able to make cinnamon rolls. You'll be able to make pizza dough, croissants, all different kinds of things with this base recipe. Donuts, that's one that we just recently made, and they're delicious. So stay tuned for that. In order to be up to date on when I launch those different recipes, make sure that you become an email subscriber over on the blog, which I'll link in the description. I send out 2 new emails every single week over there on the blog, so make sure to drop your email in there. And make sure to like and subscribe to this video. I send out 1 new video every single week here on YouTube. I hope that you enjoyed this video today, and we will see you next time. Take care.